Hey folks, welcome back to the shop here. What I have for you today is a Remington model 1100. This is a Magnum version of it that we have here in front of me. This is a 3-inch only gun. It will not cycle 2 3/4 shells. And we'll kind of go over some of that and why this particular one won't do that here in a minute. It's gas operated. It was one of the first gas operated guns that had a noticeable reduction in felt recoil. Made it pretty popular among sportsmen for every variation of hunting you can think of, skeet, trap, things like that. It was a really, really popular gun when it came out. It was designed by Wayne Leake, somewhere, I want to say 1963. It was replacing the Remington Model 58, which was the replacement for the 1148, which was a replacement for the Model 11, which was the same pretty much as the Browning A5. They still make these today, alongside with their 1187, which obviously came out in 1987 when they first introduced that, with basically some kind of upgrades to this one here. It's available, I think now it's still sold in 12, 20, 28, and 410. And every variation that you could possibly think of, super high grade competition models, vent ribs, custom checkering, engraving. There's Ducks Unlimited versions and all kinds of other special editions of these things. They've produced well over 4 million. I know that for a fact they're over 4 million. Somewhere in the 80s they produced a plain Jane version of this. It was a basic matte finish bluing on it, no embellishment, no engraving, nothing. Plain birchwood stocks, nothing special about them, but they internally and functionally are identical to the Model 1100. They would interchange directly. There was the 12 Sportsman or Sportsman 12. They also had it was an auto and a pump version of that Sportsman 12. So the pump version of it was basically just an 870, a plain Jane 870, but that was later replaced in the late 80s when they quit making those Sportsman models. The 870 Express is where that came from. That's the plain Jane version of the 870 now. And same thing with the 1100. 1987, that's where we get the 1187. Then the 1187 came out and they discontinued the Sportsman 12 auto and pump both. Pretty unique guns. They make them that do fire in 2 3/4. They make them in 2 3/4 and 3-inch. This one is a 3-inch only. It won't cycle 2 3/4, and it has to do with the porting in the barrel lug. They did make a 3.5 version of it that they discontinued pretty quickly because it just battered the living crap out of itself. They fell apart in people's hands. You have a tough time finding parts for them now, even for that same reason. But all in all, they're really good guns. They've kind of proven to the test of time. They've proven to be pretty reliable guns, and they are extremely common. Like most any other shotgun, we'll start by taking the magazine cap off, sliding our 4-in wood off there. Some of them have little metal shields in here to protect the wood from when the gas vents out here. This one doesn't. Barrel comes off after that, just pretty much like any other shotgun takedown. In here, I don't know if I can be able to get this in view for you or not. There we go. So the gas porting that we were talking about, that little hole that you see right there, that's where the gas bleeds off from the barrel. And this one is purposely limited. It actually has less holes because it's a higher pressure, designed for higher pressure cartridges, and that's why it won't cycle 2 3/4. This is a fixed full choke gun. They are all pretty much interchangeable chokes for them. The next thing I'm going to pull off here is there is an O-ring, and these O-rings are absolutely imperative that they're in good working order and everything else on these guns. And a note on these is you can't just go to your auto parts store and buy an O-ring and replace this. They're much thinner. The diameter of this itself is around here is much thinner than what you'd find in an auto store. Those ones in the auto store are 90 or 100 thousandths diameter. These are closer to like 65 or 70. And what that will cause is when it's in the gun, the action won't go into full lockup because this is getting stopped. All these little gas rings and everything right inside of this barrel lug, and that O-ring is what holds in the pressure as everything cycles back. The O-ring actually sits up here in the front of the gun, in front of that gas port, but these O-rings kind of press up against it, or the O-rings, excuse me, these gas rings sit up against it, and that 30 thousandths or so is enough that the gun won't go into lockup. And what you end up getting is, because it's slightly out of battery, a lot of times what you end up hearing is when you go to pull the trigger. Let's see if I can make it do it without actually dropping the hammer on this thing. Oh, I dropped it. Anyway, typically what you'll get is you'll get kind of a click out of the trigger, but it won't actually drop the hammer on it. And that's because it's just enough out of battery that the disconnector has, disconnected the sear, and it won't allow it to fire. And that clicking you hear is it's trying to engage the sear, but there's not enough there, and it's just kind of slipping off. And that's typically due to this being the wrong size. Somebody put some kind of AutoZone O-ring on the gun, or this is just chewed up inside of it and is causing all kinds of jams. Typically, most problems with this gun can be solved, things like that, just by cleaning the damn thing. They get incredibly dirty, like most shotguns do. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to knock out the trigger group. These trigger pins, you don't really have to worry about getting those confused when you're taking them out or putting them in, because one is physically larger than the other. You can see there that they are not the same diameter, and so it's, you're not going to get those confused. Trigger group comes out. These trigger groups, don't mess with them. Don't take them apart. Don't mess with them. If you screw this up, the whole thing's got to go back to Remington. They refit it with a whole new trigger group. They won't fix this one. They replace the whole thing. You can get some of the parts for this, like your carrier here. It actually comes off pretty easy. You can replace those. You can get parts, but all these other stuff, like your the pin that holds your hammer on, your hammer here is held on by this pin here, and that's actually a swaged over, kind of staked in there, and so your disconnector and hammer and all that stuff, you pretty much have to drill it out, and you're going to screw it up. This is the disconnector, and this is what I was talking about when it's not in full battery. This lifts up the leg to your right sear, so to speak. But if it's off, it won't fire the gun like that. So if it's pushed up like this, you can see that it doesn't engage the sear. And as you come down right about there, see how it just kind of skips off instead of actually grabbing the sear? Well, that's because the gun's not in full battery, and that's what's happening there. You can do things, the safeties will come out. You just need to knock this little pin here. There's a little detent ball and spring underneath there that will come flying out as soon as you knock that pin out, so be careful. They're pretty simple, but yeah, don't mess with these trigger groups. From there, we'll pull charging handle, pop just right out there, and this whole thing, I typically will turn it up like this, and you got your here, I'm gonna have to show you. Your kind of a recoil rod here, I forget what they call this guy, but this fits up against the carrier, the bolt carrier, into your action spring back here, which is what this little cup is right there. and I'll pull that out here and I'll show you how that fits in there. But you've got two shell latches, your primaries and secondaries. You got one shell latch here, and it's just staked in. This thing runs all the way back here. Your trigger pin runs through it right there, and they're staked in. It's not uncommon for these to fall out. They make a special tool that you can get a hold of and put this back in here and repeen some metal over. Remington, it happens often enough that even in the factory one that's in the gun, there's an extra little spot here to restake it. So in case you basically swedge up too much metal that this won't even hold it anymore, they give you one extra little notch on that guy to do it. So it's a well-known issue, but they're easy to fix. You have to push this little guy in, this shell latch there, to get the bolt carrier and your action arms to come out. So I just take my finger into there and I push it in, and if I can get this thing to cooperate, it'll come off right just like that. Now the reason I hold that up like that is because when you pull that thing out sideways, all this stuff's going to dump right out, or at least your bolt and all that, and it's kind of annoying, so I like to have it caught and captured. This guy right here is just kind of a guide. It helps slide over the mag tube. Same thing here. This is your piston. They have the stickers on there, so when you put the orientation of your gas rings and your O-ring and all that other stuff, you can get that back on there in the correct thing. These usually wear off pretty quick. Your mag tube. You got your typical mag tube cap there. These can break every now and then. They make replacements. They're easy. Shotgun cap. Spring comes out, and then your follower behind it, the magazine follower here. That little guy there. Here, I just take a pair of pliers and pinch it, and then rotate it out. Stock comes out. This one has the nut on the end there. You can see that kind of thing there. So you just get yourself a big screwdriver typically, and it'll come off. I'm gonna do that here, so give me a second. You guys are all just hanging around waiting for him to unscrew himself, huh? Alright. So, big ass screwdriver, and the buttstock will come right out. And that nut, that's what it looks like there. It also has this little guy here, this little washer looking deal. It's got a couple little gnarly teeth on it, and that's to bite into the wood to create a surface for your crush washer to crush down onto without compressing the wood. So it would sit in there like that up against here, just like that. This little guy here goes on, and this keeps the stock from getting broke out. And what it does is, if you look at the way the stock is inlet and fit here, this part that protrudes out, it looks like it's been cracked once and somebody's repaired it with some Acre glass. There's quite a bit of it on here actually, probably because they were shooting it without this plate on. But when the stock goes on the receiver, that piece of wood there recesses inside up underneath the wood, and that gives it a good fit. But the idea is when you tighten it down, it's tightening up against this metal plate here, and the metal on the back side here, this rim, isn't pressing against this part of the wood, causing it to break. Let's see here, I'll go ahead and pull that out there for you. It ain't that big of a deal. You need to compress the action spring here and hold on to it because it's got some pressure on it. But that little pin there will poke right through, and hold on to it. There it goes. But that little pin there is what holds on the action spring, and that just comes out, and that little guy there, and that is your action spring follower. That's what was clipped into the guy there. that is the basic down and dirty of the 1100. You really easy to field strip. They're pretty good guns. They've been around a long time, and they're extremely popular still today. Very, very popular guns. I see absolute tons of them. There's tons of parts available, modifications. Guys run them in 3-gun, trap skeet. I mean, just about anything you can think of. So I'd imagine they're going to be around for a lot longer, as long as their popularity doesn't woe and Remington doesn't do anything more stupid to the company that they haven't already done. Thanks, Freedom Group. But we'll put it back together. Same thing, man. You want that little cup there, face that way. We'll put it in there. We'll slide our spring in there. And you have your little keeper on this end here. We'll try and hold on to that. We'll jam her down in there. And you've got to align that little notch in this keeper to the holes on that, what we call the stinger or whatever, the tube here. I'm trying to do this for you guys on the camera here. It's a whole lot better if you got this in a vise, because then you've got 2 hands to work with, you know, and the vise will give you essentially a 3rd hand. I'm gonna lose this thing, I know it. I'm gonna spring this thing right across the shop, and you guys get to laugh at me because I'm an idiot. There we go. I am really, really surprised I didn't launch that thing across the room. Now that my hands have got oil all over them, makes it hard to hold on to this thing. We just cleaned this gun for the guys, so it's pretty greasy. I'm gonna put plate back on. It doesn't matter which way it goes on, as long as it goes on there. Put our stock back on there, like so. And like I said, you want to put that little O-ring thing. What I'll do is I'll get it on my pinky there, make sure it goes teeth down so it'll bite in the wood, and I'll set it in the stock and get it. I use my pinky to, actually, I don't know if I can get that, to try and get that over the deal, or you can use something as simple as a long punch or screwdriver, like that, and guide it all in. Just like so, and then back with a screwdriver and tighten it down. It doesn't have to be super tight. You'll feel it when it wants to stop. That's what that little washer's for, man. That little crush washer or safety washer or whatever you want to call it. Lock washer, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. Lock washer. Alright, got that back on there. Like I said, you don't have to crank down on it, man. It'll get on there tight, and you'll know when it's tight. It's no big deal. And everything else, again, kind of reverse order there. I'll stick the bolt on at the carrier, put it on there. You will have to put your action arms, you'll kind of have to guide them in there. Remember, you have to push that little shell latch in there and let that slide in, like so. Your charging handle. Alright, got that in there, no big deal. The trigger group that you did not take apart. These go in kind of funky, and they can be a pain in the ass sometimes. With the bolt and everything forward, kind of right up front here a little bit, and get that disconnector to fall into it. It's got a little galley that it rides in right here, and because it does stick out past the trigger group there, don't just try and jam it in there. You're gonna have to push the whole trigger group forward a little bit and just kind of wiggle it in there until it finds its galley. They can be tricky. You just don't want to force it, because you'll bend the shit out of it and then you're screwed. So there we go. You just get it to line up into its holes there like it should, and we'll get our trigger group and everything else. Oh, you know what I did forget? This guy. This guy's really important to make this gun work. I was wondering what the hell. Okay, so pull that out. Let's see if I can get that back in there. Let's see. What I'll do is take that, and then it rides in that same groove as your bolt carrier and all that. And nope, I'm gonna have to pull the stupid bolt carrier. Man, when I goof big. So push shell latch in, bolt and carrier and op rod and all that'll come out. It's got that curve and bend. You want it to sit like this inside the gun, and it'll go inside that little track there, and you'll see the same one that carrier rides in. And again, just take your pliers and push them in and get that little guy in there. Back into our carrier or shell latch, so it'll go in. There we go. That's better. What a dumbass. Put charge handle back in there. And like I said, just kind of tilt it in and wiggle it a little bit. Don't fight it real hard. This thing should drop in there relatively easy. You might have to wiggle it a little bit, but pins. Some of these things go in, push in and out real easy. Some of them not so much. It's no big deal. You can just kind of tap them back in. Pretty easy. Your gas ring, these two gas rings, and the way the orientation goes is you've got the flat side to this big one here with a bevel on the inside, and you have this one here that has a bevel on this end, and then a small like that. It's smaller up here. That goes inside that bevel like that, and this flat side faces your piston or action arm thing there. You take your O-ring and just kind of slide it over, and it'll ride kind of in that groove there. No big deal. Sometimes it helps to have your action lock back like that, and then you just kind of everything will fall in line there. 4 wood magazine cap, 4 retaining cap, whatever you want to call that stupid thing. That guy, that Hootis right there, and screw her back on. And that's it. That's all she wrote on the Remington 1100. They're super simple to take apart and put back together. They can be tricky sometimes when they want to act up. I've seen them. I've had to, all kinds of stuff, man. I've had crushed receivers come in here, and I've had to open the receivers back up a little bit. The ejector will break out of them. Sometimes your extractors, things like that. Their parts are readily available, and they're relatively easy to work on. So a lot of information on this gun on the interwebs, man. So you shouldn't have any troubles, you know, if you want to work on your own. If not, take it to a professional and let them screw it up for you. But that's all there really is to these things. They're great little guns. Give me a thumbs up, you know, a share, subscribe. I just kind of do this for the fun of it. So like I said, if you got any questions on here, something that I missed, comments, whatever else, let me know.